This 1864 photograph of a Union soldier looks heroic until you notice the woman behind him. At first glance, it is exactly what you expect from Civil War portraiture. A young man in blue wool, brass buttons catching the light, standing tall for the camera. But it took months before anyone looked closely at the figure in the background. And when they did, everything changed. Dr. Maya Hollins had been cataloging Civil War materials for the Tennessee State Museum for 11 years. She had seen thousands of soldier portraits, officers posed with swords, infantrymen with rifles, group shots in camp, letters folded into frames. Most of them told the same story: duty, sacrifice, the great moral struggle. This photograph arrived in a donated collection from a Nashville estate in late 2019, filed under Union Military Tennessee Occupation. The soldier stood centered, hand resting on a camp table. Behind him, slightly out of focus, a black woman stood near the tent opening. She held a tin cup. Her expression was unreadable. Maya almost filed it away with the others, but something kept pulling her back. It was the woman's posture, the way she stood, not quite relaxed, not quite at attention, the way her left arm hung slightly stiff, the way the light caught something on her wrist, just visible beneath the edge of her sleeve. A thin, irregular line, darker than the surrounding skin, too precise to be shadow. Maya set the photograph under the lab's magnification lamp and leaned in. The mark ran in a perfect band around the woman's wrist. Rough texture, slightly raised, not a bracelet, not decoration, a scar, and not just any scar, the kind left by metal worn too long, rubbing through skin until it healed in permanent testimony. Maya sat back in her chair, the overhead fluorescents humming. This was not just a pretty old photo. Something here was wrong. Maya had built her career on context, a doctorate in 19th century material culture, postdoc work on photographic archives, years spent learning how to read the edges of images, the parts photographers did not intend to document. She had written papers on enslaved people who appeared in plantation portraits, usually positioned as proof of the owner's wealth. She knew how to spot the signs, where people stood, how they held their bodies, what their faces refused to show. But this photograph was different. The soldier was Union. The setting was occupied Tennessee. The date, based on uniform details and studio markings, was summer or early fall of 1864. By then, enslaved people who escaped to Union lines were supposed to be free. The Emancipation Proclamation had been in effect for over a year. Lincoln was running for re-election on a platform that included abolishing slavery permanently. So why did this woman have manacle scars? Maya carefully removed the photograph from its frame. The backing was original, stiff cardboard with a printed label, J.M. Whitfield, photographer, Nashville, 10. Beneath, that in faded pencil, someone had written, CPL Ethan Graves, 5th Tennessee Cavalier, August 1864. And below that, in a different hand, much lighter, Contraband woman, name unknown. Contraband. Maya knew the term. It was the bureaucratic language Union commanders used to describe escaped enslaved people, legally ambiguous, neither enslaved nor fully free, property that had been confiscated from the enemy. She had read about contraband camps, the massive refugee settlements that formed wherever Union armies moved through the South, tens of thousands of people fleeing bondage, arriving at Union lines with nothing, hoping for protection. She had read about the chaos, the disease, the overcrowding. She had read that many of these camps eventually became places where black refugees performed labor for the military, cooking, cleaning, building fortifications, digging graves. But she had never seen it documented this way, a soldier posing for his portrait, a woman with fresh scars in the background, as if she were furniture. Maya pulled out her phone and called Dr. James Torrance. He taught Civil War history at Vanderbilt and specialized in the Tennessee campaigns. If anyone could help her understand what she was looking at, it was him. They met the next morning in the museum's research library. Maya laid the photograph on the table between them. James put on his reading glasses and leaned close. He studied the soldier first, then the woman, then he saw the wrist. He sat back and exhaled slowly. "Do you know what you have here?" he asked. Maya shook her head. "This," James said, tapping the image lightly, "is one of the most honest photographs I've ever seen from this period, and I suspect the photographer did not mean it to be." James explained. By mid-1864, Tennessee was a patchwork of occupation. Nashville had been under Union control since early 1862. Thousands of formerly enslaved people had fled to the city. The army did not know what to do with them. Official policy said they were free, but the mechanisms of freedom, jobs, housing, legal recognition did not exist yet. So the army improvised. Contraband camps, labor details, black refugees assigned to white regiments to cook, launder, and serve. Sometimes they were paid, usually a fraction of what white workers earned. Sometimes they were not paid at all. Sometimes they were told they had no choice. The word contraband became a bureaucratic loophole. Not enslaved, but not free to leave either. And the scars? Maya asked. James nodded. A lot of people who made it to Union lines had been shackled during their escape attempts, or punished before they ran. Some had been in chains for weeks. The army would remove the restraints when people arrived, but the marks stayed. He paused. The uncomfortable truth is that some Union officers did not trust the refugees. They thought people might run back to Confederate lines, might steal, might cause trouble. So they kept close watch, and if someone was deemed difficult or tried to leave without permission, well, discipline was enforced. Maya felt her chest tighten. You mean they reshackled them? James met her eyes. I mean, it happened, not everywhere, not officially, but it happened. They spent the next 3 weeks tracing Corporal Ethan Graves. Census records showed he had enlisted in Murfreesboro in 1862, age 19. Before the war, his family farmed 40 acres in Rutherford County. No enslaved people listed in the household. Graves served in the 5th Tennessee Cavalry, a Union regiment made up of men from the middle part of the state, many of them from non-slaveholding families. In August 1864, his unit was stationed just outside Nashville, guarding supply routes. Maya found a letter he had written to his sister, preserved in a small historical society collection. In it, he mentioned having his portrait taken. He said it cost $2. He said the photographer let him pose by the officer's tent, even though he was only a corporal. He said he looked very fine. He didn't mention the woman. Maya turned to the photographer. J.M. Whitfield had a studio on Cherry Street in Nashville. Newspaper advertisements from 1863 and 1864 promoted war portraits for soldiers and families. Maya found a city directory listing. Whitfield was originally from Pennsylvania, arrived in Nashville in 1861. He was known for traveling to camps and offering discounted rates for enlisted men. Some of his work ended up in Harper's Weekly. He had a reputation as progressive, someone who photographed black soldiers with the same care he gave white officers. But his work was also commercial. He went where the customers were. And in August 1864, the customers were Union soldiers who wanted to look heroic. Maya requested access to the contraband labor records held at the National Archives branch in Atlanta. It took 6 weeks for the files to arrive. When they did, she found what she was looking for: rosters of black civilians assigned to military units in the Nashville district, summer 1864. The lists were incomplete. Many entries had no names, just contraband woman or contraband man, followed by a unit designation. But next to the 5th Tennessee Cavalry, there were 3 names. One of them was Flora, no last name, age estimated at 24, origin listed as escaped from Wilson County, assignment, cooking and camp service. There was a note in the margin, written by a quartermaster officer. This woman attempted to leave camp on August 10th without permission, restrained and returned to duty. August 10th, the photograph was dated August 1864. Maya felt cold. She contacted Dr. Annette Bailey, a historian at Howard University who had published extensively on contraband camps. Annette flew to Nashville in early 2020, just before the pandemic shut everything down. They sat in the museum's conservation lab with the photograph between them. Annette studied the image for a long time. Then she asked if she could see the back. Maya flipped it over. Annette read the penciled notes. Contraband woman, name unknown. She shook her head. They knew her name, Annette said quietly. Someone knew her name. They just did not think it mattered enough to write down. Annette walked Maya through the structure of contraband labor. The system was not uniform. It varied from regiment to regiment, commander to commander. Some units treated refugees well, paid them fairly, respected their autonomy. Others treated them as servants. Still others treated them as prisoners. The line between freedom and bondage was often invisible, defined by power rather than law. If a black woman tried to leave a camp and was physically restrained, was she free? If she was punished for refusing work, was she free? If she could not testify in court, could not own property, could not move without a pass. Was she free? The Emancipation Proclamation did not create freedom, Annette said. It created a space where freedom might become possible, but that space was full of violence. They traveled south together to Wilson County. The old plantation districts were still there, though the houses had been renovated, repurposed, turned into bed and breakfasts and event venues. Maya and Annette visited the county courthouse. The clerk led them into the basement archive, where old property records and court documents were stored in boxes. They found bills of sale from the 1850s, deeds transferring enslaved people from one owner to another, lists of names, ages, prices, and then, in an 1862 ledger, they found a notation. Flora, age 22, absconded July 1862, believed fled to federal lines, property of estate of Charles Reeves, deceased. Absconded, the legal word for escape. Flora had run during the chaos of the Union occupation. She had made it to Nashville. She had survived. And 2 years later, she was standing in a photograph holding a tin cup with scars fresh enough that the light caught them. Maya requested the military service records for the officers of the 5th Tennessee Cavalry. She wanted to know who was in command in August 1864. The name that came back was Captain Oliver Drennan. She found his war diary in a university archive in Knoxville. It was meticulous, daily entries, weather, troop movements, supplies, and on August 11, 1864, one line, dealt with a discipline matter involving contraband labor, matter resolved. No details, no names, just matter resolved. Maya stood in the archive reading room holding the diary and felt rage settle into her chest. The photograph was not an accident. It was a document, a piece of evidence preserved by chance. The soldier wanted to look important. The photographer wanted to make money. And Flora was there because she had no choice. Her presence in the frame was incidental, background, an object in the scene. But her body told the truth. The scars told the truth. The stiff posture told the truth. She had been restrained. She had tried to leave. She had been punished. And then someone posed for a portrait 3 feet away from her, and no one thought to ask her name. Annette helped Maya trace the broader pattern. Contraband labor was not unique to Tennessee. It was everywhere the Union Army went. Virginia, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina. Wherever enslaved people fled to Union lines, the same system emerged. Some commanders, like General Benjamin Butler, tried to formalize it with wages and contracts. Others simply assigned refugees to units and expected compliance. The Freedmen's Bureau, established in 1865, was supposed to regulate these labor arrangements and prevent exploitation. But it was understaffed, underfunded, and often run by men who did not believe black workers deserved the same protections as white ones. What made Flora's story especially painful was the timing. By August 1864, the war was turning. Sherman was marching toward Atlanta. Grant was grinding down Lee's army in Virginia. Slavery was dying, but the habits of control, the reflexive violence, the assumption that black bodies existed for white convenience, those things did not die. They adapted. They found new language, contraband, labor contracts, apprenticeships, vagrancy laws. The photograph captured that transition, the moment when one kind of bondage ended and another began. Maya knew she had to show this to the museum's leadership. She prepared a presentation, high-resolution scans of the photograph, annotations pointing out the scars, copies of the contraband rosters, the diary entry, the property ledger from Wilson County. She laid it all out. In February 2020, she met with the museum's director, the chief curator, and 2 members of the board of trustees. They sat in the conference room on the 3rd floor. Maya projected the photograph onto the wall. She walked them through her findings. She explained contraband labor. She explained Flora's attempted escape. She explained the discipline matter. She explained why this photograph was not a heroic portrait of a Union soldier. It was evidence of exploitation. The room was silent for a long moment. Then one of the trustees, an older man whose family had donated the collection that included the photograph, leaned forward. "Are you saying my great-great-grandfather's regiment enslaved people?" Maya chose her words carefully. "I am saying the system was more complicated than we have been taught. The Union Army did not re-enslave people in the legal sense, but it did exert control, and that control was often violent." The trustee shook his head. "This sounds like revisionist history. My ancestor fought to free enslaved people. He believed in the cause." I'm sure he did, Maya said. But believing in the cause did not mean he treated black refugees as equals. The evidence is in the photograph. The director, a woman named Sharon Pruitt, intervened. I think what Dr. Hollins is showing us is important, but we need to be careful about how we present it. We do not want to undermine the contributions of Tennessee's Union soldiers. They were on the right side of history. Were they? Annette asked. She had been sitting quietly until now. Because from where I sit, the right side of history does not shackle people who are trying to leave. The meeting did not end well. The director said they needed more time to review the findings. The trustee said he wanted an independent historian to verify Maya's research. Another board member suggested that maybe the scars were from something else, an accident, an injury unrelated to the military. Maya felt her professionalism crack. She pulled up the diary entry on her laptop and turned the screen toward them. What do you think discipline matter involving contraband labor means? She asked. No one answered. Over the next 6 months, Maya and Annette built their case. They contacted descendants of other black families who had lived in Nashville during the war. They found oral histories recorded in the 1930s by the Works Progress Administration. One interview with a woman named Hattie Clemens, aged 93, included this passage. My mama said when she first got to the Union camp, she thought she was free, but the soldiers put her to work and said if she left, they would lock her up. She said it was different from slavery, but it was not freedom either. They found a letter written by a white Union chaplain, Reverend Marcus Hale, to an abolitionist newspaper in Ohio, dated September 1864. In it, he described conditions in the Nashville contraband camps. Many of these poor souls have traded one master for another, he wrote. They are fed and sheltered, yes, but they are not at liberty. They are bound to the army by force of circumstance, and I fear by force of will. I have seen women weeping because they were not permitted to seek work in the city. I have seen men punished for asking about wages. This is not the freedom we promised. The letter had never been published. The newspaper editor thought it was too controversial. Maya and Annette presented everything to the museum again in August 2020. This time they invited journalists, a reporter from the Tennessean, a producer from Nashville Public Radio. Sharon Pruitt could not stop them from talking to the press, but she could control what the museum did with the photograph. The board met privately. They debated. Some wanted to bury the story. Others wanted to exhibit the photograph with full context. The trustee, whose ancestor had served in the 5th Tennessee Cavalry, threatened to withdraw his financial support. Sharon Pruitt tried to find middle ground. In the end, they agreed to a compromise. The photograph would be included in an upcoming exhibition on Civil War Tennessee, but only with a detailed explanatory panel. The panel would acknowledge contraband labor, the ambiguity of freedom during the war, and the specific evidence suggesting Flora had been restrained. It would not use the word enslavement, but it would not avoid the word coercion. The panel would include Flora's name, recovered from the contraband rosters. It would end with a question. What does freedom mean when leaving is not an option? The exhibition opened in March 2021. The photograph was displayed in a small alcove, lit carefully so the scars on Flora's wrist were visible. The panel text was longer than any other in the exhibition. Visitors stood in front of it for a long time. Some left angry, some left crying. A few left comments in the guest book. One read, I always thought the Union were the good guys. I do not know what to think now. Another read, thank you for telling the truth. In April, Maya received an email from a woman in Memphis named Lucille Harrison. She said her great-great-grandmother had been named Flora. She said family stories mentioned that Flora had worked for the Union Army during the war. She said she had never known the details. She asked if she could see the photograph. Maya invited her to Nashville. They met in the museum on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Maya led Lucille to the alcove. Lucille stood in front of the photograph for 5 minutes without speaking. Then she reached out and touched the glass gently over Flora's face. She looks tired, Lucille said. She does, Maya agreed. She looks like she is pretending not to be scared. Maya nodded. Lucille read the panel. She read the contraband roster entry. She read the diary note. When she finished, she turned to Maya. Do you think she survived the war? I do not know, Maya said. The records stop in 1864. After that, there is nothing. But you looked. I looked. Lucille smiled, sad and sharp at once. That is more than anyone else did. The museum eventually added Lucille's family history to the exhibition. Oral traditions passed down through 5 generations. Flora had survived. She had moved to Memphis after the war. She had married. She had children. She had lived into her 70s. Her descendants knew she had worked for the Union Army, but they did not know the details. They did not know about the restraints. They did not know about the discipline matter. They knew she did not like to talk about the war. Maya and Annette wrote a paper together. It was published in the Journal of the Civil War Era in late 2021. The title was Contraband Labor and the Limits of Emancipation, Photographic Evidence from Occupied Tennessee. The paper used Flora's photograph as a case study. It argued that the transition from slavery to freedom was not a single moment, but a protracted struggle, and that Union military policy often replicated the power dynamics of slavery even as it claimed to dismantle them. The paper was cited widely. It was taught in graduate seminars. It was referenced in museum training materials. But more than that, it changed how people looked at Civil War photographs. Because once you see the scars, you start looking for them. Once you notice Flora standing in the background, you start noticing all the other people in the backgrounds of all the other photographs. Servants, laborers, children, people whose names were never written down, people who were treated as props in someone else's story. The archives are full of them, thousands of images where the main subject is a white soldier or a white family, and somewhere in the frame, barely visible, is a black person whose presence is never explained. Historians had looked at these photographs for decades and not asked questions. Now they were asking. Maya kept working. She found more photographs from J.M. Whitfield's studio. In several of them, black women appeared in the background, holding trays or standing near tents. In one image, a man stood at the edge of the frame with his hands behind his back. When Maya magnified the image, she could see his wrists were bound. Not with rope, with leather straps. Military issue. The photograph was dated October 1864. The man's name was not recorded. The Tennessee State Museum started an ongoing project to identify people in Civil War photographs. They partnered with genealogists and community historians. They reached out to black churches and historical societies across the state. They asked people to bring in family stories, family names, anything that might connect to the images in the archive. Slowly, names emerged. Flora was not the only one. There was Samuel and Mariah and Ezekiel, people who had been invisible, people who had been labeled contraband or servant or cook or nothing at all, people who had stories, people who had resisted, people who had survived. The truth is, most Civil War photographs lie, not by showing things that did not happen, but by hiding things that did. They lie by framing. They lie by focus. They lie by choosing who stands in the center and who is pushed to the edge. They lie by calling some people soldiers and other people contraband, as if one category meant hero and the other meant object. The photographs were made for white audiences by white photographers in a world that did not believe black lives had the same value as white ones. So, of course, they lie. But they also tell the truth if you look hard enough. If you zoom in on the edges, if you notice the hands, the postures, the expressions that do not match the official story, if you see the scars, those scars are everywhere in hundreds of photographs. Most of them have never been studied. Most of them are filed away in archives under labels that say nothing important. But every single one of them is evidence. Every single one of them is a story waiting to be recovered. Flora stood in the background of a photograph in August 1864. She held a tin cup. She had scars on her wrist. No one wrote down her name. No one asked what she had endured. No one asked what she wanted. But she was there. And now, more than 150 years later, someone finally looked. Someone finally asked. Someone finally understood that the photograph was not about the soldier at all. It was about her. It was always about her.